Good evening, everyone. I hope you're well. I'm happy to be back with many of you, maybe for the first time for some of you. Tonight, I want to continue the discussion from last night, and I would like to bring in one of the teachings on equanimity and spend some time, a little bit of time, just getting clear about what that term has a range of meanings and connotations, but specifically how it's used in traditional Buddhist or Dharma teachings, and then spend some time really looking at uh, how we can, practical ways we can bring equanimity in and how it can support us. Last night I was talking about one aspect of Dharma practice that I think is so important, and it's the willingness, the ability to be present with anything, be present with happiness, joy, pleasant experiences, but also being present with difficulties and not automatically turning away, and how it can serve us to learn how, and it's a skill and an ability that we develop to really stay with things and be with things. And so we spent some time talking about that. Well, as a practice, turning towards, or sometimes we think of it as resting back to receive an experience, or sometimes it feels like turning into an experience. Being able to be present with things, it requires a certain amount of equanimity, but it also is a practice that develops equanimity. So I'll say more about that in a bit. So equanimity in traditional way it's talked about in Theravada Buddhist teachings, it has two meanings. Sometimes there's what is called equanimity of feelings. And what that means is that you don't have a lot of your actual experience is pretty smoothed out. You don't have a lot of strong ups and downs arising at all. So that's one meaning. The more foundational meaning and the more important meaning that's used is equanimity in the sense of that I think most of us probably think of, in that it's not so dependent on not having agitation, difficulties. Sometimes I call it the storm clouds of the mind come through. It's not about the experience at all. It's about how we are relating. It's going back to what we said last night about how are we being with what's happening? And can we be with things in a way where we're not getting knocked around by them? And that's a more foundational or fundamental kind of equanimity, because we can actually have quite a bit of equanimity even with a lot of mental agitation if we have the presence and the clarity to be with it and to know what's happening in the moment. Then we're more connect. We don't get lost in the experience. Sometimes the way it's talked about is resting back in awareness. And framing it that way, some people don't really get a sense, what does that mean to rest back in awareness? But that's one way. When you hear that, what it's talking about is not disconnecting or detaching or pulling away, but it's letting the pure knowing of our mind, of what's happening. Sometimes you can think of it resting in mindfulness, resting in awareness, resting in the knowing. Sometimes it's used languages like that. I often will use my own phrase. I've never heard anyone else use it, but it really captures my own experiences, resting in the stream of non-clinging. But it can also be resting in, we bring in these beautiful qualities. We talk about the Brahma Viharas, these qualities of our hearts that we develop, resting in love, say. Then that can be more of a resting place, or kind of a refuge, really. So then from there, to allow us to meet experiences, feel them, be intimate with them, but not caught up by them. many of the traditional ways that the path to liberation, or you could say enlightenment, is talked about in the Buddhist world ends in equanimity. So it's actually a very important concept. You look at there's a very important list called the Seven Factors of Enlightenment. Perhaps we'll talk about it at some time. It's just one of let me just pause for a minute about this whole thing of lists. Historically, we don't really know, it's not recorded. The historical accounts don't tell us how the teachings got preserved. They're not completely in lists, but there's a lot of lists in there. But I think most Buddhists, people who study Buddhism, the scholars, would agree that since things were not written down at the time of the Buddha, and it was an oral tradition, compiling things as lists was an aid to memory and just a way to help organize and systematize things. So there's a lot of lists. There's the Four Noble Truths is a list, the Eightfold Path. I just named one, the Seven Factors of Enlightenment. You don't have to go learn all these lists, but you will hear them if you're using this framework or this system of Theravada Buddhism as a system to practice in. Dharma, of course, goes beyond, it transcends all these lists. It's not about lists. It's not about really even Buddhism. It's about something that's very immediate and alive in our experience. But as a path of practice, it's often formulated as these lists. And so we can take one or more of these lists and use them as, again, frameworks or system structures to support us and to keep in mind and working with. So Seven Factors of Enlightenment is one. I don't want to go into the list now. I'm just naming it. Perhaps I can talk about it sometime if people want. You're welcome to contact me if you have questions about it. You can email to Metadharma, but you can also do a web search on that list. It's a very important list. It lays out, anyway, one formulation of laying out the path of practice. It culminates in equanimity. Very important states of clarity and undistractedness of mind, sometimes you'll hear the word concentration, can culminate in very specialized meditative states known as jhana. The Buddha made a big deal about those. Well, in the culmination of the way jhana is laid out is a huge emphasis on equanimity, very important. And I mentioned a few minutes ago the Brahma Viharas. Those are states of loving kindness and compassion. There's four of them. Well, the fourth, the culmination is equanimity. So it's very, one way you could think of all of practice is leading towards a very profound place of equanimity. You don't have, well, I like formulating it that way, so you can see how that lands for yourself. So we can start to notice if we think going through life with an equanimous mind might serve us. Certainly when we have more equanimity, even if, say, something difficult happened or someone did something that was reactive normally, but then as equanimity strengthens, rather than meeting it with a reactive mind, if we have enough space around it, enough distance between what happens and our response, because a wise response is not necessarily the same thing as a reaction. There's some kind of intentionality there. There's some kind of consciousness or awareness there. And usually, I shouldn't say usually, but certainly we all know times when there's a reaction to something. It may or may not always serve us well. But if we have the presence, have the presence, the equanimity when something happens, then at least we have the potential to make a choice. Now, sometimes something happens and we know what's happening and it's strong enough and it still pulls us in a difficult direction. Yes, that can happen. But this is what we're building, is a ever more building the foundation of equanimity. It's stronger and stronger, and it's alive with us more and more of the time as an ally or support to come in with us to meet what's happening. I shared, I think it was a week or two ago, but it really gets to this point of equanimity is I was talking about having been, I remember a time I was on a retreat, a pretty long retreat, uh, silent meditation retreat. And, being on these longer retreats, as those of you who've done them know, you can really drop into some very uh, uh, powerful places of clarity and undistracted awareness. A lot of things can happen. And so, I was having a good retreat. I was touching in some places like that. And I remember doing some walking meditation, and I was having, difficulties were coming. I think I was having some kind of depression or despair, something. These things can come. Ups and downs can happen even in intensive meditation, for sure. And I became aware that I was just watching. I call them, as I said earlier, the storm clouds of the mind were flowing through. And, it was a lot. I don't remember the details. I just remember it was quite strong. And, but my equanimity had cultivated so strong, I was able to really be with it and I actually had kind of an interest. I remember having that feeling, and it struck me. I was interested, of course, in all these, what we tend to think of as the most pleasant parts of meditation. It can be very blissful, and your mind can get into very beautiful places. Well, I would have a lot of interest in that, but I tended maybe not to have as much interest in my difficulties. But then I noticed, no, I actually was just as interested, just as present in, with really kind of equally, because it was just what was happening in the moment. And so that was it really struck me of getting to another layer of what we mean by equanimity, not dependent on the mind state, like the state of mind. We say mind state in Buddhism. So the first piece I want to mention is about how to put this into practice. I want to throw just a few suggestions that have helped me. Is this notion of thinking, of being aware that whatever happens in our minds and our hearts, these mental states, they are, well, I mean, it sounds nonsensical. They're states of mind, but we really want to know, no, this is a mind state. And the reason that that can be so helpful if we can have awareness with anything is because, I'm just stating the obvious, and what I'm about to say may seem obvious, but we don't live our lives as if it's true. That these moods, emotions, mind states are coming and going all the time. Yes, they're happening due to their own causes and conditions. Sometimes, we know what the cause and condition is, but just to be, maybe just to be a little humorous about it, but to really make a point, you can know what the condition is, but if someone did something, maybe your neighbor acted in a way that was annoying, and it's happened before, and it's something that triggers you, you can know that it's a mind state, but if you know the causes and conditions is, yeah, I know the causes and conditions because my neighbor's, being a jerk or something like that. Yes, that's kind of a knowing, but it certainly has the tinge of aversion in it. But if you can just leave out the commentary and just know what is happening, oh, irritation, anger, reactivities arising in my mind. If we don't see that and don't know that they're just mind states, because the problem with mind states is it is part of our experience. We are experiencing the anger, the fear, the despair, the loneliness, whatever's going on. And of course, the other half is all the pleasant and states of mind too, which are important. All of it. If it's not known with awareness, there is a strong, strong tendency, in case you haven't noticed, a strong tendency to get caught in it, to get identified with it. I use this word despair, which can mean a lot of things without getting into the details, but I don't really deal with that so much really anymore, but I've had experiences, especially being in the retreat context, where I would go on to retreat, and I think, and I've done lots of retreats. I thought, okay, this is going to be great, because I know what can happen on retreats. And then what used to happen for me regularly in my early years, and this went on for some number of years, doesn't happen anymore, but once I got to the retreat and would settle in, and it would be as if I had set aside the busyness of my life that in some ways without me being aware of it, where had things covered over. The image that's often used is if you want to see, if you're at a beautiful mountain lake and the water's crystal clear, but when the wind's blowing, um, it ruffles the surface. You can't see to the bottom, but when the wind dies down and stops, the lake comes like glassy smooth. You can see effortlessly to the bottom. So that's an image that's often used. Well, it can be like that. We're busy in our lives. We may not even be aware of it. We're just going about our business. But when you go on retreat, and it could happen in our home life too. Maybe it's happening for you because you're having to stop in ways you didn't because of our social distancing because of this whole coronavirus. Well, then things that this can happen that can be covered over, all of a sudden come up. And so that would happen to me quite a bit on retreat, and all my old, especially when I was in my 20s, it could really come up, and all my adolescent and all my wounded psychology would come roaring up. And for me, it took forms of self-esteem, and I use this term despair. I'm not getting, I don't mind sharing about it, but I won't go into the details because those can take many forms, but it'd be very powerful. And I remember going to these retreats and just thinking, oh no, not this, not this. And it was so painful and hard to sit with. And usually what would happen is it would go through this process for about a day and a half. By the end of a day and a half, maybe 2 days, it would kind of wash through. And of course, I could have normal ups and downs, but I pretty much would then start to settle deeply in, and it would be more equanimity, like the first kind of equanimity. Equanimity of feeling, where I was just more in a pleasant, still awareness kind of place, which was lovely. And it took some amount over time. Those states, I think, they got healed up a lot. I mean, I did some psychotherapy in my day too, which I found very powerful. But also, I put a lot of it on the meditation itself, and just going deep, but and with what was happening, and it had to kind of go through its process, and some kind of disentangling happened, and things kind of let go, self-liberated, I guess, just by being with them, working with them. But along the way, there was a real shift that would happen when I hadn't gotten to the point where it didn't happen for me anymore. It still could happen. But when it happened, and it still could be painful, but I was getting to know it more. So I was able more to be with it and have a friendlier, well, I don't know, friendlier, but a more allowing relationship with it. Because I knew, yes, it was real, it was important. There was some real wounded patterns in me. There was some psychology in there that was important. So it was not to be dismissive of it or invalidate it. Something can matter and be important, but we can still also, right along with it, have a perspective that yes, they're mind states. They come and go. I've done this before. I know I can't know exactly what's going to happen, but these things come up. They run through their process. They'll go away. It's not always like that. They come and go. They're important, and yet they kind of have the quality we talk about in Buddhism of being empty at the same time. It's not like it doesn't have a permanent essence. It's just the experience that's arising and passing away due to, well, whatever my own history and psychology was. And it shifted my relationship. And so I was able more and more to bring the equanimity. And then I got to a place where I was aware that I was able to do that. And it really gladdened my heart more, not to be arrogant about it, because we have to be careful, because things can come and get us and trip us up. Not think we know everything, or that we'll never get tripped up, but to have more of a confidence that can come to say, I've done this, I know this, I can be with this in a way that I'm not crushed by it, I'm not bowled over by it, I'm not overwhelmed by it. And part of what helped me was the concept just to see they are mind states. That's what it is. It's not whatever story spins out of the mind state isn't necessarily the true story about me. Right? So if the mind is whatever, I'm not lovable. Well, that may be the story that my mind is telling me out of the coloring that's coloring my perception of the despair, say, or the self-esteem. You start to see these things more, and knowing that they're mind states helps us not be so clamped onto them. So you can try that for yourself just to keep the idea of them being mind states and see if it helps, even if it's hard stuff to know, these things come and go, and to see a little bit at least you can try to see if it loosens kind of the grip. It may not always loosen the grip, but it's one attitude you can bring. But there's one other piece about knowing that these are mind states. It's not only knowing that they come and go, but because there's that empty quality I talked about. That's a big topic on emptiness. Maybe I shouldn't have brought the term in because it has a lot of, well, maybe I need to pause here just for a moment to make sure nobody misunderstands. It's a huge topic, but some people, I'll just say this, emptiness does not mean nothingness. Some people think they're going to realize emptiness and poof out of existence. That's not what it's talking about. It's kind of getting back to what I was talking about when I talk about mind states. It's like a thought. Thought's a good place to get a handle on the idea of emptiness, because when a thought is floating through, there is the experience of a thought, but really, what is it? Yes, there's a thought, but it's not very substantial. It sort of arose out of, where was it before it came into existence? It wasn't anywhere. Where did it go? And so it's an insubstantial quality, and all experiences are like that. That's the idea. There's a lot more that could be said. That's the idea around emptiness. So we start to see that these mind states, that because knowing they're empty, that means, and that they're rising due to causes and conditions, it not only, if it works for you, you have to see if it gives us a chance to loosen the grip a little, but it also shows us a way that mind states can be changed. When we see it's just a mind state, then it's a whole we can't always change everything now, right? If you're dealing with depression, and as just an example, and I've known people, close friends of mine, who've dealt with what was, they had clinical diagnosis, and they were on antidepressants, and they needed to be on. There was, I don't know much about it, but the brain chemistry or whatever. I don't know that they were going to shift that just by seeing the empty nature of it. Maybe that would help, but no, there was a lot more interventions, a lot more was needed there. So we want to, of course, there's all of that. But for a lot of what's happening, you can experiment. So you don't pick that if it's that bad. If you have the luxury to pick some things that maybe aren't that strong. And I call it a luxury because life's going to bring you what it's going to bring, right? That's why it's good to practice ahead of time before the worst things hit. So we have some tools in our toolkit prepared, some strengths, some resources there. But, we have what we have to help us and serve us in any given situation. And so we use the best we can. But it is possible to shift mind states in a way that's not fake, right? So I'm not saying you can always do it. I can't always do it. But an example I've often used, some of you will have heard this many times, that I was just talking about my wife today. She was complaining that I meditate too much. And I actually don't do that much. I actually don't do that much. I've been a meditator for 50 years and meditate intensively, and I still practice to this day. And I have not done the experiment to stop the formal practice. So I just don't know what would happen if I stopped doing it. But really, I don't put that much time in. But my practice really is what I consider my learning edge. And I like to think of things as learning edges. That's a way of framing it for me. I'll come back to what I was going to say in just a moment. A way of framing it for me, and you can try this on, because when I run up against a learning edge, it takes the judgment out of it, because we all have our learning edges. And I hold them that way. It's because when I'm well within the zone that I know well and can work, it's easy. And if it's well beyond your zone, it can be maybe too much. That's maybe when situations are overwhelming for us, perhaps. But at the learning edge is a great place because it's right there. We can work with it, but we actually have to kind of bump up against that edge sometimes, and maybe have to do a little to find our way. So I've shared that for me, I really consider the learning edges of my own practice to be not in the formal sitting. Believe me, I'm really big on the formal sitting, but that's just where I'm at these days. You may be in a different place. And what I've found is that as I move about during my day, it's really gotten very simple for me. The awareness of through all the practice, it carries through. I'm not claiming I can never space out, but I'm pretty pleased with the results. And so you have, as many of you know from your own practice, you're lost on automatic pilot, I call it, or caught up in things less. And the wakeful presence, that stream of non-clinging, the stream of wakefulness, of knowing, carries through. You don't have to do anything, it's just there. As a matter of fact, sometimes people will take mindfulness in daily life as a practice, which is great if you're drawn to do that and want to be aware as they go about their business. For me, mindfulness in daily life has been more a fruit of practice. So it's just that's just my own way. Comes out of the sitting more. That's just how I've experienced it, but there's not one right way it's supposed to be for everyone. So you know more what's happening, and it's real simple for me now. In any moment, I'm either in some reactivity, I've constricted, contracted, I'm in some kind of stress with something, or I'm in a stream of non-clinging. And when I've contracted around something, my practice is let go. When my heart's closed off, my practice is open the heart. And so I know the times when I'm in the stream of non-clinging, the heart's open, and then I don't want to fall into a trance about it, and I still want to know what's happening, but I don't need to do anything else more, at least the way I practice. I just live. And when I hit a learning edge, I'm actually appreciative of those because I'd rather know them, the places where I have a tendency to get caught than not. But I want to work skillfully, and then I can know, and if I do have trouble, and this is what you can, if you have trouble letting go, that's a teaching you, and that's a whole other piece. And we've talked about that before, about using what comes to you as your teacher. So I'm not getting into that so much tonight, but we've talked about that, right? So getting back to my point about seeing that because things have this empty or insubstantial quality as mind states, so I call states of the heart, state of the mind, you can absolutely shift your mind state. Not always, not perfectly, and not necessarily always instantaneously, but with practice we get better at it. And so if, for example, if you happen to share one of the aspirations I have, which is to live in a way that my heart never closes off, and that's a tall order, right? And I've got plenty of work to do, no question about it. I don't think I'm doing so bad, but we have our learning edges. Those are the times when I notice my heart's closed, and I've been very pleased over the years. It gets better and better that even something very difficult, we actually can make a shift that's not fake, or it's not shoving something down, but a letting go happens because we know one of our intentions, our aspiration, is to take a stance of a heart that's not shut off. You don't have to fall into a warm gush of love. I'm not talking about that, but the question is, what does it feel like just to not have your heart shut off? That's one example. There's so many examples I use because they're mind states of a closed heart, and it happens due to causes and conditions. And because a strong conditioning factor for me in this example, I'm sure you have your own examples that you'll be able to find many. For me, a strong conditioning factor is take a strong stance. It's like I put a stake in the ground, and it's a touchstone maybe, and so when I need it, I grab onto that intention or aspiration to support me, which is I want to live in a way that my heart's not closed off. Yes, that means right now, even with that person in this situation, open the heart. And so I get more interested in it. Now, I'm not making any comment about the actions that you may choose depending on what's happening. You know, that's a whole big thing, but situationally dependent. I'm just talking about, and again, I'm just using the example of opening the heart, but for anything, if we want, we can make a shift, or we can start to practice to work that muscle and find the places where we can make shifts. And we come to know the places where it's harder or we can't do it. We come to know ourselves better. That's fine. It's not about whether you can really make the shift happen, but you want to sort of see what happens when you incline your mind in that way. And so for any difficulties that we may be going through, going back to what I was originally saying last night, and in the opening tonight, you can, there's the part of sort of standing in the fire of really the suffering of something and learning how to be present with things. But there's also learning how to shift our relationship. And sometimes, I think it was Burke last night, or someone was sharing, it must have been Burke, because he's such a strong, you know, for him, I don't know if he's on here tonight. I haven't checked all who's on, but he wouldn't mind me saying this. You know, he shared often for him using the structure of the Four Noble Truths is very, very powerful for him. It's like people use the 7 Factors of Enlightenment and many, many others. And so he was sharing, I don't want to misrepresent him, he can correct me, but the sense was, it's just like bringing that awareness was enough to give him the support he could need to let him let go of the suffering. So sometimes it's like that, just being able to be in the difficulty, know that we're suffering, looking for the cause, and using that structure can help us let go. But also, so there's that, but also this idea of seeing that it's not only being with it, but seeing the insubstantial nature, they're just mind states, knowing what we want to do, it gives us the opening that there is a possibility. So, you know, and then what you do, well, that just depends. So for example, if I'm stuck at home and I'm feeling isolated, which many, many people are, having the presence to know what's happening, you still feel it, have it, you know, be present. Maybe that's the starting point, is what is it like to be lonely? I'm just like, okay, let myself be with that. Can I be, you know, okay, I've done that. I know how to do that. It's a mind state. Can I shift or not? And then we have enough presence, we can make skillful choices. So in that example, maybe we do, what can I do if I'm stuck at home? Well, there's lots of online places for people can connect, where the connections are real, and that'd be an example of something we can try. We look at, or we start to find the ways that we're not isolated, that we are all connected. And we may have to do those through virtual online formats and things like that we can do. So that's a big topic. But it gives us a lot of choice points. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you for your kind attention.